Hello my dear students. Today let us learn and understand the basics of an important topic that deals with the truth tellers, the liars and the alternators. This topic is also known by the name the binary logic. Questions from this topic commonly appears in various competitive exams as well as campus recruitment tests. By watching this video, you will get a fair understanding about the basics of the topic, familiarity with the usage of certain terms involved, the approach you must follow while attempting the questions, and last but not the least, the confidence to solve the questions from this topic. Alright, let us now get into the terms and terminologies involved. You need to be familiar with the terms the truth teller, the liar, the alternator. Who is a truth teller? A truth teller is a person who is free to make n number of statements. All the statements made by a truth teller is considered to be a true statement. A liar is a person who is also free to make n number of statements. All the statements made by a liar is considered to be a false statement. Now, who is an alternator? An alternator is a person who is also free to make n number of statements. If the first statement made by an alternator is true, the second statement is considered to be false, the third statement is true, the fourth statement is false, the fifth one will be true, and this pattern continues. But it's equally likely that the first statement made by an alternator is false, then the next statement will be true, then the next statement will be false, then comes a true statement, then comes a false statement, and this pattern continues. Most of the question that comes from this binary logic involves people making maybe two statements or three statements. Very rarely we have seen situations where people involved make more than three statements. But in any situation, a truth teller, all the statements are considered to be true. For a liar, all the statements are false. For an alternator, it may follow the pattern true, lie, true, lie, true, lie, like that. Or it may be lie, true, lie, true, lie, true, like that. The basis of attempting questions from this topic, the binary logic, it's all about making some assumptions and then checking whether there is any logical conflict or logical contradictions. What is this assumption? What is this logical conflict or contradiction all about? That is what I am going to explain in the subsequent part of this video. But there are two main approaches for solving the questions. The first approach, I call it by the name the trigger statement approach. Trigger statement approach. Or the next method that you can follow, it's the iteration method. I shall make you familiar with both the trigger statement method and the iteration method, which method you have to adopt at what point of time in the subsequent part of this video. Let us consider a situation here. A person P is making a statement, "This is a pen." If I know that this statement is false, what does it mean? This is a pen. If the statement is false, then it means that this is not a pen. Listen carefully. This is a pen. If that statement is false, then it means that this is not a pen. Consider another situation. A person X is making a statement, this is not a book. If I know that this statement is false, what does it mean? Double negation makes the statement positive. So this is not a book. If it is false, then it means that this is a book. You will be dealing with these type of situations a lot number of times while dealing with questions on binary logic. Now let me present in front of you what is this trigger statement approach. In the question, if you identify any person making one among these four statements, I am a liar, I am an alternator, I am not a truth teller, or I am not an alternator. If any one among the four statements that is mentioned here, if it is spotted, then you can go by the trigger statement approach. If one among these statements are present, then you can make certain definite conclusions about the person and the nature of the statement, and using that you can proceed. Kindly note the statements like I am a truth teller or the statement I am not a liar. These two statements are not considered as trigger statements. Kindly note it again. Only one among these four statements, if it is present in the question, then you can proceed by using the trigger statement method. Let us consider the trigger statement. A person P making the first statement, I am a liar, and then he says Q is good. What is the nature of this person P? Is he a truth teller? Is he a liar or an alternator? Let us go by the assumption, conflict, contradiction part. Let me assume that this person P is a truth teller. Then the first statement is true. The next statement is also true. The assumption you have made is that the person P is a truth teller. Look at the first statement made by P. P says I am a liar, which means P is a liar. That statement is true. P is a liar is true, which means in the statement the person P is a liar, but in the assumption P is a truth teller. The assumption and the statement, they are in two logically different situations, which means this is called as a conflict or a contradiction, which means that this assumption was wrong. The ideal situation is that whatever you assume should get reflected in the statement. You assumed P to be the truth teller, but in the statement you found P to be a liar. You ended up seeing a conflict or a contradiction, which means your assumption was wrong. Let me now assume that P is a liar. If P is a liar, this statement is false. The second statement is also false. The assumption is that P is a liar. The first statement made by P, I am a liar, that is P is a liar, is false, which means P is not a liar. This is what you see in the statement, but in the assumption P is a liar, Assumption and statement, they are in two logically different situations, which means we see a conflict here, which means this assumption P is a liar is wrong. So I can see that the person cannot be a truth teller, the person cannot be a liar, which means the person P, he must be an alternator. Now, once I know that this person is an alternator, P making the statement I am a liar, that is P is a liar, is false because P is an alternator for sure. Since P is an alternator, the first statement is false, means the second statement, it has to be true. Now, what is the conclusion that you can make? A person who declares himself to be a liar, he will always be an alternator. He cannot be a truth teller, he cannot be a liar, he can only be an alternator. That statement where he says, I am a liar, will definitely be a false statement. Consider the trigger statement. X, the person making a statement, I am not a truth teller. Let me assume that this person X is a truth teller, which means the first statement is true, the second statement is also true. X is not a truth teller. X says I am not a truth teller, which means X is not a truth teller is true, which means in the statement X is not a truth teller, but you assumed that X is a truth teller. Assumption and statement, they are in two different logic, which means that this assumption is wrong. If a person says, I am not a truth teller, he cannot be a truth teller. Let me assume that X is a liar. Then this is false. The second statement is also false. X says, I am not a truth teller. That is, X is not a truth teller is false, which means double negation makes it positive, which means X is a truth teller. In the statement, X becomes a truth teller, but in the assumption, X is a liar. In the assumption and in the statement, we see two different situations, which means this assumption X is a liar is wrong. X cannot be a truth teller, X cannot be a liar, which means that this person X, he must be an alternator. Now, an alternator is telling you that I am not a truth teller. We know that X is an alternator, which means X is not a truth teller, it has to be true. Which means Y is good, it has to be false. So, what is the logical conclusion? A person who declares, I am not a truth teller, he will always be an alternator. The statement, I am not a truth teller, it will always be true. Let us consider the next trigger statement, a person P telling that I am an alternator, Q is good. Let me assume that P is a truth teller. Then this statement becomes true, the second statement also becomes true. P says I am an alternator, which means P is an alternator becomes true. So in the statement P is an alternator, but in the assumption P is a truth teller. So the result, we see a conflict because assumption and the statement, they are in two different logic or two conflicting situations, which means that this person P cannot be an alternator. A person who says I am an alternator, he can never be a truth teller. But this person P, he can be a liar or he can be an alternator. Depending upon the situation, you can decide whether he is a liar or an alternator. But a person who says I am an alternator, he can be a liar, or equally likely he can be an alternator also. If the person is a liar, then the first statement is false, the second statement is also false. If the person is considered as an alternator, then I am an alternator, that is P is assumed to be an alternator. P says P is an alternator, which is true, which means the second statement, it has to be false. You can now note something very interesting. The statement that immediately follows I am an alternator is definitely appearing to be a false statement. If I extend this logic, the statement that is lying immediately prior to I am an alternator, or that immediately follows I am an alternator, it will definitely be a false statement. Listen carefully. The statement that immediately follows I am an alternator will definitely be false. If some statement is there prior to I am an alternator, that also will be false. Now the logical conclusion is this: a person who declares I am an alternator, he can never be a truth teller. He may be a liar or an alternator. The statement that is lying immediately prior or before or immediately after I am an alternator, it will always be false, as you can see here. Now let us consider the next trigger statement. A person P making the statement I am not an alternator. Let me assume that this person P is a liar. Then this statement is false. The next statement is also false. What I can observe here is that in the statement P says P is not an alternator, and that is false, which means P is an alternator in the statement. But P is assumed to be a liar. Assumption and statement, they point to two different logically conflicting situations, which means that this assumption is wrong. A person who declares I am not an alternator, he can never be a liar. But he may be a truth teller, or he may be an alternator. If this person is a truth teller, then this is true, this is true. If any statement that is made prior to I am an alternator, that also will be true. If the person is an alternator, P is an alternator, so I am not an alternator will be false, which means Q is good has to be true. Since this person P is an alternator, any statement that is prior to I am not an alternator, it also has to be true. Now, what is the interesting observation that you can make here? A person who says, I am not an alternator, he can never be a liar. He may be a truth teller or he may be an alternator. The statement that is lying immediately after I am not an alternator will definitely be a true statement. Likewise, if there is any statement that is prior to I am not an alternator, if there is any statement, then there also you can see the statement that is lying prior to I am not an alternator is also true. So, the conclusion is a person who declares I am not an alternator, he can never be a liar. He may be a truth teller or an alternator. And that statement that is lying immediately before or after I am not an alternator, it will always be true. I hope that you have now understood what is the trigger statement approach. If one among the four statements, that is I am a liar, I am not a truth teller, I am an alternator, I am not an alternator, if it is present, then you can definitely go ahead with the trigger statement approach. But what if the trigger statement is absent? Then you have to follow the iteration method, wherein you will randomly assume a person to be a truth teller and take certain decisions. I shall explain those concepts in my subsequent videos. Thank you for watching. All the best.